Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. Ghislaine Maxwell and her legal team, they should just get used to taking all of these L's because they keep losing as if they were the New York Jets. One loss after another, one ridiculous request denied after another, and they continue to spin their wheels. They continue to throw shit against the wall like monkeys in a cage, in hopes that some of it sticks. Judge Preska is certainly not biting. She once again has made a ruling against Ghislaine Maxwell, and it just goes along with the rest of these rulings that have been made against Maxwell throughout this portion of the case. You know, previously, in this Jeffrey Epstein case, Ghislaine Maxwell case, it went the other way. All of the court rulings seemed to favor Epstein and the co-conspirators and Maxwell. Now, certainly seems like the shoe is on the other foot, at the very least in Preska and Nathan's courtrooms, where every single tactic, every single plot, every single scheme that Maxwell and her team come up with have been headed off at the pass and absolutely shot down by prosecution and then ultimately the judge's ruling. And we see that again today in our article. We have another bid by Maxwell to try and keep a part of the deposition secret, and Judge Preska isn't playing that game. Preska once again told Maxwell and her legal team that this was not going to work and that this information would be released to the public. Now, this is going to be the way it is throughout this whole entire case, just like we've talked about from the beginning. Maxwell and her legal team are going to try and work the technicalities, try and work the loopholes, try and find a way to get Maxwell off without trying to prove her innocence, because we all know, once this gets to the actual trial portion of the case, once this gets before a jury, Maxwell and all of the other co-conspirators that end up criminally charged are in for big trouble. Because the evidence is mounting, and it was already as high as a mountain. So you add up all of that evidence, and you add up all of the actual eyewitness testimony that's going to be brought out and used against her and the co-conspirators, and you can understand why they're looking for technicalities, why they're looking for loopholes. Because when it comes down to defending their client's guilt or innocence in a courtroom in front of 12 jurors, they understand that it is going to be an astronomically large task for them to engage in. They don't have the firepower. They don't have the testimony that's going to be coming towards them from prosecution. And really, when it comes down to it, what they don't have on their side is the truth. So let's jump into this article from Reuters, authored by Jonathan Stemple, and see what they're talking about. This article is from Reuters. A U.S. judge on Monday rejected Ghislaine Maxwell's effort to keep under wraps an excerpt from a 2016 deposition that she fears could undermine her criminal trial on charges she aided the late sex offender, pedophile, Jeffrey Epstein, and committed perjury. And that was to be expected. Judge Preska has not been very happy, let us say, with the maneuverings of the Maxwell team in her courtroom. We've seen her admonish Alan Dershowitz and his legal team, and we've seen her do the same to Ghislaine Maxwell's team. And it certainly seems like Judge Preska is done with the BS. It seems like Judge Preska is interested in one thing and one thing only at this point: moving this case forward and creating transparency as she does that. Because it takes a lot of courage to do what she is doing here, in my opinion. I'm sure she's faced some blowback, right? Some pressure from some of these high-profile people that don't want this stuff being out in the public. So it's nice to see a judge that actually, is following the law and making sure that the case is transparent for the public to see exactly what's going on. She understands that there's great interest in this case, and she understands that there are great stakes. And in my opinion, Judge Preska has done a fantastic job facilitating this whole entire ordeal. U.S. District Judge Loretta Preska said Maxwell had only a minimal privacy interest in the 20-line excerpt because it concerned massages and not private sexual activity of consenting adults, and the public had a right to see her testimony. Now, we know that Judge Preska has redacted some of the information about consensual sex that Maxwell had with whoever is in the redactions. Now, while I understand why that happened, and I get it, I really wish that there were no redactions in this case. I wish that everybody was brought to light, put out into the sun, and forced to shine. Because too many people have hidden behind the shadows in this Jeffrey Epstein case throughout the decades. Too many people have been allowed to get away with that, and have not been called out on the carpet, and have not been called into question. And you see it recently in a smaller way with Chelsea Handler. She goes to Jeffrey Epstein's after Jeffrey Epstein's been convicted, and her excuse is, well, I went with Katie Couric. I didn't know the guy. Well, you didn't have CNN? I thought you loved CNN, Chelsea Handler. You didn't have MSNBC or Fox News or the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Inquirer or the Daily Mail, or you get the drift, right? The story was everywhere. But good old Chelsea Handler runs around and acts like she had no idea who she was hanging out with, who she was partying with, who she was breaking bread with. And then, when people ask her about it, they're throwing softballs to her and not even giving her any sort of rough question. Like, well, he had already been arrested for soliciting prostitution from a minor, which is a ridiculous law, by the way. Prostitution, minors, how's that even possible? And you still go over to this dude's house to break bread with him? It's gross. And I think that unredacting this thing would bring more of the roaches scurrying from the rushes. There is no reason not to unseal this portion of the testimony, the Manhattan-based judge wrote. While the court acknowledges Miss Maxwell's interest in a fair criminal trial, Miss Maxwell can argue all her points to the presiding judge in her criminal trial as she has already. And again, that's exactly right. Preska's job here is to worry about the unsealing of this defamation case. Her job here is to unseal the documents that have been sealed up in this case for so long, and to distribute those to the public in the manner that she has laid out before the court and before both parties. So, the criminal portion of this trial that is being heard by Judge Allison Nathan is for Judge Allison Nathan to decide, right? So Preska is worried about what's going on in her courtroom in this case, and obviously she is aware of some of the unique challenges facing her and Maxwell because of the unique nature of this case. But that hasn't stopped Preska from doing her job and making sure that these documents keep getting unsealed and sent out into the public sphere. Lawyers for Maxwell did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Well, we know that. They never respond to requests, right? They don't want to comment. They want to be the one pushing the narrative. They don't want to answer to the narrative. They want to be the narrative. So, of course, they're not going to respond to questions. What they'll do is they'll come out with a statement, right? They'll make a statement, and instead of answering questions and being on their back heel, they'd prefer to assert their narrative. So that's why you see them come out with statements as opposed to answering questions from these lawyers. And it's a good strategy, right? Because what you're doing now is you're taking the initiative and you're putting out the message you want to put out as opposed to answering questions and pushing someone else's narrative forward. Preska had previously released large portions of the July 22, 2016 deposition, which came from a now-settled civil defamation lawsuit against Maxwell by Virginia Roberts, one of hundreds, of women who have accused Epstein of sexual misconduct. So, this has been going on for a while, obviously. 2016 when this was settled, and then now, all the way into 2021, we're still talking about it. It's still having ramifications on the case, and it's still something that is very important to what's going on, because the more information that's released via these depositions and the other sealed documents, the more things we have to use as a blueprint, right? To cross-check, to use as a template for what has occurred previously, and you can match things up, and it's a good resource to have. Now, not too many bombshells, right? We know a lot of the stuff that's in these depositions already, but what it does is it provides a receipt that you can show, a receipt that's tangible, a receipt that you can link to. And I think that's the key with these depositions and these sealed documents, because it brings life to what we already know. Maxwell, 59, has pleaded not guilty to a 6-count indictment claiming she helped Epstein recruit three teenage girls for sex from 1994 to 1997 and then lied about it. Well, she can, plead all she wants and deny it and act like, this never occurred. But again, once this starts the trial portion and witness after witness after witness after witness is brought up to the stand to testify against Ghislaine Maxwell, I honestly do not understand. I don't see a pathway forward for them. Their only hope is some kind of wacky, weird technicality or loophole that one of her lawyers figures out. Because short of that, I don't see Ghislaine Maxwell having any chance in the world of getting off on these charges. Never mind the RICO charges that are coming down the pipe. She has said that the 20 lines of testimony was the basis of one of the perjury charges. So that's interesting, right? We'll get a little bit of a look at exactly what she said in this 20-line excerpt and how that could be related to these perjury charges. It's always an interesting bit of detective work to do, right? Go back and try and put all the pieces together. That's one of the things that fascinates me about this case so much. I really enjoy doing that, trying to fit all of the puzzle pieces onto the board. And, like with a regular puzzle, you got to start with the corners, right? And work your way in. And that's exactly what we have done for all the way since October of 2019. We started on the edges, and we have worked our way all the way in. And I'll tell you what, folks, the puzzle really is starting to come together. That charge covered Maxwell's denials to ever giving Epstein or anyone else a massage, knowing whether Epstein possessed sex toys, and knowing whether Epstein had sex in the 90s and 2000s with anyone other than herself and 2 other women. Look, does anyone really believe that Jeffrey Epstein was only having sex with the 3 women from in the 90s all the way through the 2000s with all that money and all of his disgustingness? Does Maxwell really think that anyone's going to believe that? because I can tell her and her trial right now, and her team right now, that nobody believes that. Nobody believes it. Maxwell believes prosecutors obtained the deposition transcript illegally, and it should be kept out of her trial. You know, again, it's not that it didn't happen, right? It's that it was illegally obtained and it should be kept out of the trial. That's what we call a technicality or a loophole. And I'm glad that all of you are hip to the fact now that Maxwell and her team are angling for just that. It's not about guilt or innocence for these people, because they know they can't prove that this lady is innocent. Her lawyers have said that argument would be compromised if prosecutors could claim that any errors they made were harmless once Preska released the testimony. So, again, they're trying to frame it like it was prosecutorial misconduct. That's how they're trying to frame it. And Preska is just not having it. She's saying this is absurd, your charges are absurd, your claims are absurd, and in fact, your whole entire defense is absurd. Beat it. Here's another L. U.S. District Judge Allison Nathan oversees the criminal case and will decide whether to admit or suppress the deposition. See, so again, Preska, her job is to release it. Her job is to get it out there in the sphere. And now it'll be up to Nathan to decide whether it is admitted or if it's suppressed. Maxwell is separately seeking to dismiss all or part of the indictment, arguing in part that prosecutors are targeting her only because Epstein is dead and she serves as a substitute for him. Yeah, it has nothing to do with all of the girls and women that have come forward and said on record and in court papers that you abused them and helped facilitate their abuse. It has nothing to do with that. It just has to do with Epstein. Well, guess what, Ghislaine? You were his co-boss. You were the underboss. You were rolling deep. You were given orders. You had a leadership position. You were in charge of a RICO-style operation. So now, reap the whirlwind. Epstein killed himself, allegedly, in August 2019 in a Manhattan jail cell while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. Maxwell was arrested in July and is being held in a Brooklyn jail. Nathan has twice denied bail. And if she tries to get bail again, I'm sure Nathan will deny it once again. Ghislaine Maxwell and her legal team and her 3 supporters all need to understand one thing and understand it very clearly. She is not leaving that jail cell. She will be there until trial. And then, after the trial, when she's convicted, she's never leaving again. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at Bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. To everybody who has helped support the podcast, thank you folks very much. All right, everybody, I'll be back later on, and we'll pick this thing back up where we left off.